If you have either exclusively or just primarily played D&D, I have a little exercise I want to run by you. Try to recall the last time you enjoyed failing a roll. A time when you rolled the die, and it came up that natural one, and you go, this is going to be good. All right, here we go. Now, this happens sometimes. It certainly does. I'm positive I've had these moments myself in D&D and related games. But I would suggest that these are fleetingly rare. And a big part of that is because D&D and its related family of games that are designed with the same sort of like flow and paradigm as D&D, they don't do a great job of rewarding failure. Rewarding failure? What? Yes. Rewarding failure, I think, is a great mechanic for RPGs to have. I'm going to give some examples, of course, because it's what I do. And then I'm going to talk about why I think it's important for modern RPG design. So we want to start with one of my very most favorite RPGs, Blades in the Dark. It's a good game. You should try it if you have not already. Blades in the Dark has sort of two factors going on here with regards to how it rewards failure. One, the consequences for failure can be mitigated. You have a resistance mechanic where if something bad is about to happen to you, you can resist it, and at a cost, the bad thing does not happen. It can't turn a failure into a success, but it can remove or mitigate the consequences of that failure. So that's the one thing. It softens failure, softens the bad thing that's about to happen to your character. But also, it's not a game that really encourages, like, it's a game that very explicitly calls out, like, you are not your character. Your character is probably a bad person. They're doing foolish and reckless things, and we are here as players not to see them succeed, but to see what happens, success or failure. And a lot of times, stories naturally construct themselves because of the way that Blades in the Dark stories are made. They naturally construct themselves to make failure more interesting than success. And I think that's really the key right there. Success and failure are rarely equal in terms of which one is more interesting. If you think about non-generative fiction, that is like movies, books, TV shows, etc., a lot of times the most interesting parts of these stories come from characters failing. Not only just like there's the obvious example, like the protagonist often fails along the way to success, because you want the protagonist to succeed in the long run. Like in the final battle, most stories are geared towards letting the protagonist overcome to triumph over whatever their opposition was. But along the way, they're going to fail a lot. And that's how they learn their lessons. That's how character growth happens. And that's where some really interesting plot twists happen. You know, if everything goes well for them the whole way, it's probably not that interesting. So I think games that lend themselves towards situations where failing is more interesting than succeeding are going to encourage this like, I don't mind failing so much. A, because it's going to be more interesting to fail than to succeed, and B, I know that my character is not going to immediately combust because I have this resistance mechanic. So Blades in the Dark does a really good example of that. You don't have to go quite so far. Monster of the Week, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, rewards failure by literally giving you an XP reward. When you fail a roll in Monster of the Week, you get an XP. One moment. The sneeze is coming any moment now. And there it goes. It's gone away. Cool. We're back to it. You literally get XP for failing a roll. which means that the player is then put in a position where like maybe they really want to overcome this. And Monster of the Week does also have, I think to a lesser extent, this sort of like maybe it's more interesting to fail than to succeed, depending on how. But that's a lot more group dependent. Like in Blades in the Dark, I think it actually like it's more naturally generated by the mechanics. In Monster of the Week, you might have a group where this is the case. You might not. Some groups for Monster of the Week are just going to be pretty straightforward. We're fighting a monster. We are focused. We have an obstacle to overcome. And the more focus a game has on here's a series of obstacles, overcome these obstacles to get to your final goal. The more the game focuses on that, the less interesting successes are going to, or the less interesting the failures are going to be. Because you really just want to succeed to progress the game. If you don't succeed, you don't progress the game because you haven't bypassed the obstacle. This, to an extent, can be mitigated by good game mastering. And it can be done in any game. This is not game specific. You can, as a game master, try to create situations where failing does not halt progress. You know, if the party needs to get into a city and, they fail the check to convince the guards to let them in, well, now they're just stuck outside. That's not interesting. We've got to get in. So then they usually when a party hits failure like that, they tend to sort of like lose all their momentum and start, going around in circles trying to figure out what to do next. They've lost their direction. They lost their momentum. They have to reestablish themselves, sort of regroup. That takes time at the table. It's not that interesting. Instead, create situations where failure develops the story in a different direction. It doesn't stop the party. It pushes them in a direction that maybe they didn't intend to go or weren't aware could possibly have existed. Monster of the Week can do that. I don't think it has a lot of specific mechanics for that, but simply awarding XP encourages the players to consider maybe failure is more valuable than success here. And that can be a good thing. Another way to reward failure indirectly, because it's not actually rewarding failure, but it is sort of giving the players something when they fail. A game with non-binary resolution mechanics, which I have a whole video on. Non-binary resolution mechanics are great for that, you fail but, or you succeed but. That sort of middle ground where you can fully fail a roll, but you're going to get something out of it anyways. Legend of the Five Rings does this really well with its opportunity mechanics. Even if you fail a roll, you might be able to keep some opportunity dice to spend to get something else en route to whatever it is that you were trying to accomplish. And that game in particular does a fantastic job of making failures more interesting than successes. I personally, and I think a lot of my players are on board with this, I usually am more thrilled at a failed roll than at a successful one. Because a successful one it's predictable. We're going to accomplish our goal and move the story forward at a predictable pace. When a failure happens, anything can occur. That's when stuff gets really interesting. When you're trying to use courtesy to appeal to someone of higher status and you fail that roll, now you've offended someone of higher status. That creates all kinds of rippling consequences. Maybe they're not going to act against you directly, but they're going to make things harder for you, spread rumors about you, etc. The environment, even like I'd say equal parts, the environment and the mechanics for L5R work together to make failure really, really interesting. So there's some examples of games that do reward failure. And it is important, I think, to reward failure because, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about, where D&D-esque games tend not to, which means that a failed roll tends to result in a loss of momentum. If the players feel like they have to succeed at every roll, that becomes a problem, because then they get hyper focused on, optimizing their success chance, and the game becomes more about how can we become more efficient at overcoming these obstacles, and less about who are these characters and what are they like. Do we maybe the goal that we're all united for is not the most important thing to some of our characters, and we have other things that we care about more. That's super interesting. Those are storylines that can be explored. Depending on the system and the environment of your particular table. And it's not necessary for all campaigns, but I think it's a really good thing for most RPGs. Like, if you're designing an RPG, I would say this is something you should probably strive for by default, unless you have a very specific reason not to. It's something you should keep in mind as you're building mechanics. Reward failure, not to make the game easier, but to make the game more interesting, because failure is going to happen. And, nothing really sucks more than, like, I'm going to do my big thing. Maybe depending on the game, like maybe I'm using up a bunch of resources on my one big go, and then you roll badly and, well, nothing happens. The null result. I don't want to say it's outright abjectly bad design to allow null results, result where, you roll the die, you do an action, and nothing changes about the situation. That's a null result. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing outright, but I think modern RPGs have so much better options. We don't need null results anymore. Modern role-playing games should not be designed with null results being possible. I think I can take that stance where, it's not going to ruin a game. Like, I'm not saying, like, if your game has null results, it's a garbage game. No, absolutely not. Like, it's so easy to sort of, like, push aside. It's not an important thing. It's not a big deal. But I think that a game that has no null results is just better than the same game that has it, if that makes sense. I lean against the existence of null results. It's just not that big a deal. But I think, spending time at the table to, decide your action, to make the roll, maybe you're expending resources, maybe you're not, depending on the game. But to do all that, and then the situation has not changed. So that last, 2 to 5 minutes or whatever it takes to do that whole process, fully wasted. Something about the situation should change every time a player does something. Good for good or bad. Yeah. So and I think rewarding failure by pushing the story forward, or even just directly rewarding the player, like in Monster of the Week, I think is a better idea than just having failure be a nothing happens.